exploring how we can master ourselves by looking at how authors and experts say it is possible, with your host, Shashiti Basu. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 77 of How to Be, with me, Shashiti, as your timid presenter, guiding you through life's tricky topics and skills by reading through the best books out there. Motherhood is sold to us as the perfect package, a surefire path to eternal happiness. But behind the scenes, this happiness can be intermingled with pain, self-doubt, and all manner of physical and emotional challenges. Unsurprisingly, women who express regret are called selfish, unnatural, abusive, bad mums, or believed to exemplify the whining culture we allegedly live in. But why don't we hear about the truths about the challenges surrounding pregnancy and having a baby? Here is Serene Gato, who is a birth doula and HypnoBirthing educator located in Coral Springs, Florida.
I think that people don't talk about the challenges of birth for a couple of reasons. One, I think that they feel guilty when they experience challenges, like they're supposed to be able to handle it and that it's supposed to be this beautiful, perfect, magical moment in their life. And then when there are challenges, they're like, well, I'm supposed to be made to do this. Why is it not easy for me? And that leads me to the second point is I think that people don't know what normal is. They don't know that, when they're experiencing a traumatic birth or that they're going through challenges throughout the birth or pregnancy postpartum, because we don't talk about it a lot in our society. And we also live more isolated. We really just don't know what normal is. And so you just kind of assume, well, I guess this is normal. And we also don't live in a society that's great at creating opportunities to reach out for help. So I know as a doula, I hope to create a safe space for women to come and talk to me and be validated about what they're experiencing.
Our first book is from Marianne Levy, who spent 10 years as an actor and voice artist after studying in Cambridge. Before becoming a full-time children's writer, she has published 5 books for children and teens. Levy's journalism began with books for The Independent on Sunday, before expanding into arts coverage. She has written for The Independent, The Guardian, and The FT. Her roundups and reviews lead the iNewspaper's children's books coverage, alongside her feature and book reviews. In 2018, within a handful of days of her having her second child, she felt compelled to write the essay, 2 Weeks, which was published on Medium. A few months later, she wrote The Mothers. The huge response to these essays led her to write extensively about motherhood, both on Medium and for the Eye. Don't Forget to Scream, Unspoken Truths About Motherhood was originally published in 2022. I was lucky to speak to the author, hence here is a snippet of our chat. But find the full interview on www.howtobe247.com or on the YouTube channel.
I think for whatever reason, and I think the reasons are quite complex, we as a society have the sense of a mother as a kind of idealized figure for whatever reason. And mothers, maybe they suffer, maybe they find it hard. But the important thing is never to speak about that, but to kind of internalize it so that you have this kind of outward carapace of smiling, tender, the Virgin Mary, sort of almost biblical, endless, beatific, perfected womanhood. And anything to the contrary of that, I think people find very frightening. And it goes against our notion of what a mother or a woman can and should be. I think people are quite profoundly disturbed by the sense of anything other than absolute selflessness in mothers. And I think I certainly, when I became a mother, I had always assumed that, okay, I'm very flawed as a person. And I feel very various, I'm very human as a person, I think now. But I thought, all of that will kind of fall away when I discover the perfected, endless, boundless love that I have for my children and, the sense of absolute sacrifice and that I'll do anything for them. And of course, I do love them boundlessly and I would do anything for them, but that doesn't fall away. Who you are absolutely doesn't fall away, and nor should it fall away, because otherwise you'll be raising children with very unrealistic expectations of what it's like to be in the world and have interpersonal relationships. But I found it very disturbing having to sit with this idealized notion of motherhood and then the understanding of who I actually was. And I found holding those two things together and going about my new life as a mother was profoundly difficult and destabilizing for a very long time. And I still do, is the honest answer. I still haven't reconciled those two things, but I am trying. And it's interesting because I think I was scared of the pain, which feels a pretty natural thing to be scared of pain. And I think, and I do understand why this is so. There's the sense that pain, certainly in the context of having a baby, is different from, say, the pain of breaking your leg. It is a sort of necessary part of birthing a child. But I don't think that makes it any less frightening. But because it's so necessary, there is an understandable assertion from both the medical establishment and from the people we turn to help us get through this kind of thing, you know, the yoga practitioners, the doulas and whatever, to kind of embrace the pain and see the pain as a, you know, I mean, there was, I think I can't remember if I actually mentioned his name in the book, but I know there was one very senior midwife that wrote about the pain is what actually makes you a mother. Without having the pain, you're not a mother, which of course is total bullshit. Because otherwise, you know, what about people who adopt? What about people? But I think we're caught in this kind of dilemma of saying, well, pain is necessary. Pain is something that you have to undergo, but therefore you shouldn't vocalize your fear of it, because that somehow again makes you a less good mother, makes your somehow is related to your strength of personhood and strength of whatever love that you might feel. So I remember when I was pregnant being very, very afraid of the pain of labour and of the episiotomy specifically, and, you know, absolutely horrified. And I couldn't find anything about it anywhere that simply said it is okay to be afraid. It is okay to vocalise your fear and therefore advocate for yourself and get the best treatment. I couldn't find that written down anywhere. Everywhere I looked, as it were, said, well, when you hold your baby in your arms, it will all be worth it. And I really struggled. And I still struggle with that, because I thought, well, okay, at what point is it not worth it? You know, what game are we playing here? Is it, if I were to die, would that not be worth it? Okay, well, even then, you know, you're swapping a life for a life. Well, okay, if we were both to die, presumably at that point it wouldn't be worth it. But what kind of sacrificial altar have I made for myself here simply by wanting to have a child? So I struggled with it a lot. And I think societally we struggle with it. And I don't think there are easy answers. But the one thing I do think is that it is something we need to speak about. It is something we need to be able to talk about more openly. In absolute terms, I suppose I was always very aware that paternity leave in the UK right now, so where are we? We're in 2023. Paternity, the cases of people taking any decent chunk of time, even with shared parental leave, which is becoming more widespread. When I had my children, it was so rare. And this is, you know, relatively recent. My son is going to be 5 soon. That the HR company that my husband worked for, the HR department of the company my husband worked for, literally hadn't done it before. So we had to find a friend who was an employment lawyer to sort of walk us through it. And we're very lucky that we had someone who could walk us through it. But even now, when I think it's that much more widespread, you know, people take, you know, a few months at most. I always felt that the difference between me and my husband was that he was dipping into the world of full-time childcare, whereas it was a world I felt as though I'd walked through a hall of mirrors. I couldn't find my way back again to the kind of adult life that I used to lead. I felt, you know, it was as though there was a siren going off in my head. It was always sort of being pulled backwards towards being needed, you know, and whether I was breastfeeding for my first child, and I wasn't for my second, but I felt as though there was that kind of invisible cord. I don't know that men have that as much for the physical reasons of breastfeeding, but actually our breastfeeding figures in the UK are relatively low. So it's not just that. It is a societal expectation of the absolute selflessness that women must exhibit that I don't think is there for men. I think there's this, you know, you hear enough about men doing babysitting when it's looking after their own baby, whereas a woman would never be told that she's babysitting her own baby. I remember very vividly, I think this is something that I write about quite early on after I'd had my daughter. My cousin was getting married and my daughter was very small, and so we couldn't have her in the ceremony. So my husband stood outside the function room and held our daughter while I nipped in to watch this wedding. And a member of staff at the hotel went, "Wow, what a great dad." And I thought, you're being congratulated for holding your baby that is the level at which, you know, a man is congratulated for performing fatherhood. And, you know, and then I think about all the times that I was, you know, shouted at on the bus or criticized in Marks and Spencer's or whatever because the baby was crying or the baby needed this or the baby. And I just think it's a different world. I feel as though when I was on, the line I think I say in the book is, imagine if we didn't leave on maternity leave. Imagine if instead of leaving, we stayed. And I felt as though I had been shut out from my former life and my former existence at the point where I had a baby. It was a very, very hard year for me.
Levy's book is a raw, honest and often humorous account of the author's journey through the ups and downs of motherhood. Levy pulls no punches in her descriptions of the challenges of raising children, from the physical and emotional tolls of pregnancy and childbirth to the joys and frustrations of caring for babies and toddlers. From the first chapter, which details the author's struggles with postpartum depression after the birth of her first child, it is clear that Levy is not interested in presenting a glossy, sanitized version of motherhood. Instead, she shares her most vulnerable moments with brutal honesty, unafraid to reveal her fears, doubts, and insecurities. Levy's stories will be familiar to many mothers: the sleepless nights, the endless rounds of feeding and changing diapers, the constant worry about whether one's child is healthy, happy, and developing normally. But what sets Don't Forget to Scream apart is Levy's willingness to confront the darker, more taboo aspects of motherhood. She tackles head-on the sense of isolation and loss of identity that many new mothers experience, as well as the guilt and shame that often accompany choices about childcare, career, and family planning. In one chapter, Levy describes the feeling of being touched out, a phenomenon familiar to many mothers who find themselves constantly being climbed on, pulled out, and tugged on by their children. She writes, "Give her all of you. It was like being in a fairy story. Give her your skin, your blood, give her your brain and your heart." In another chapter, Levy takes on the cultural pressure to be the perfect mother, to have it all and do it all without ever showing a crack in the facade. She writes, "For as long as the society in habit continues to venerate the perfect mother, I'll despise the parts of myself that exist outside of her demands." Levy is also unafraid to tackle the more difficult and uncomfortable aspects of motherhood, such as the toll it can take on romantic relationships. She writes, "It had made me hate the system, hate my body, had at times made me hate my husband, who had become a parent without exertion, without physical pain." Did you know an intense fear of childbirth is called tocophobia, and apparently it's on the rise, affecting 1 in 10 women. Professor Irene Tracy, head of the University of Oxford's Department of Clinical Neurosciences, Nuffield Chair in Anaesthetic Science, said, "Scoring pain on a scale of 1 to 10, I've been through childbirth 3 times, and my 10 is a very different 10 from before I had kids. I've got a whole new calibration on that scale." On top of that, it is reported that 1 in 200 births in the UK is a stillbirth. That, when it comes to the question, are maternity services safe? Between 2014 and 2016, half of all acute NHS maternity trusts were deemed as either inadequate or requires improvement by the Quality Care Commission. Right now, as I talk about this, it's 41%. Throughout the book, Levy is a fierce advocate for mothers, challenging the patriarchal systems that devalue and dismiss their work. She argues that mothers are often expected to do the lion's share of the child work and housework without recognition or compensation, and that this unequal burden contributes to the gender pay gap and other systemic inequities. She also takes on the medical establishment, which she argues too often dismisses or pathologizes women's experiences of pregnancy, childbirth, and postpartum recovery. Despite the many challenges of motherhood, Levy is also quick to celebrate the joys and wonders of it, and talks about all the beautiful children ready to fill up the world. Our final book is from Candice Braithwaite, who is the founder of Make Motherhood Diverse, a hugely popular campaign to make representations of motherhood in the media more representative. As a leading voice on modern motherhood, she has appeared on countless panels, and her writing has been featured in publications like Stylist, Metro, and the Huffington Post. She is the author of I'm Not Your Baby Mother, which is part memoir and part manifesto about life as a Black British mother. Here is Candice Braithwaite speaking to Good Morning Britain.
The title was me trying to destabilize the negative imagery usually positioned around Black motherhood. The idea that Black mothers are struggling, or that, we just can't keep it together. The moniker baby mother is very, very negative. And so I wanted the title to literally shout at you and say, Black mothers, especially in the UK, we are as nuanced as white mothers. We have a very different experience. And like you said, the book is for everyone. Although I wrote with Black women, young Black women in mind, it is so helpful, almost detrimental. It's important that white mothers, white people read this book also, because you're going to learn so much.
Drawing on Braithwaite's own journey to parenthood, the book describes how she survived everything from postnatal depression to the realization that she could never protect her children from racism. These events motivated her to create space for representations of diverse experiences of motherhood online. Like Levy, Braithwaite was ambivalent about becoming a mother. She saw just how difficult it was for her mother to raise children alone. Struggling with depression and overwork, her mother wasn't always available for her children. So at just 11 years old, Braithwaite had to pick up the slack, caring for her younger siblings and helping to run the household. But in her early 20s, an accidental pregnancy made her face a difficult decision. Already unsure about having children, she knew that her boyfriend wouldn't make a reliable father. Contending with the negative social stereotypes, she didn't want to be seen as a baby mother, a Black woman left to raise a child alone, typically because of an absent or unavailable father. So Braithwaite moved forward with the choice to have an abortion, a choice that she knew was right for her situation. She was lucky to have the support of her grandmother and wonderful medical staff as she recovered. And when she became pregnant again at age 26, she felt different. What had changed? Well, this time she was older and felt more prepared. And most importantly, she was madly in love with a man who she knew would make a wonderful co-parent. She decided to take the plunge. But it wasn't long before all of Braithwaite's concerns about the racism directed at Black families proved to be true. One of her first checkups was soured by a racist microaggression. The doctor asked skeptically where the baby's father was. The implication being that clearly he didn't believe the father would have an active role in the child's life. Even with a single mother, Braithwaite had strong male role models growing up. Her grandfather was her primary caregiver in the first years of her life. He was the person in the family who meticulously cleaned the home and cooked delicious meals. Her own father was also an important part of her life. Although her parents split up when she was a baby, her father was devoted to her. It's true that many Black women are forced to be single mothers with fathers who aren't much involved with raising their children, but that isn't the only story. And media coverage that only tells the story of the baby mother is inaccurate, incomplete, and one-sided. It also demonizes Black fathers without questioning how institutionalized racism has affected Black families. Growing up, Braithwaite was thrust into poverty when she was forced to live with her mother at 8 years old. Up until then, she had lived comfortably with her grandparents. They were evicted from their home and bounced between council houses 8 times in a few years. Their precarious housing situation was hardly unique. More than 2/3 of Black households can't afford to own their homes. Statistics from 2017 show that first-time British homebuyers borrowed £6 billion from their parents to pay deposits and secure mortgages. But if your parents come from poverty, they wouldn't have money to lend. Poverty is handed down to the next generation, the same as prosperity. In fact, young Black families have the opposite of the head start often afforded to their white counterparts. They're generally expected to support their extended family, like her partner Bode, who sends money to family in Nigeria every month. Without a financial buffer, they're less free to pursue unpaid internships or ventures that require startup capital. So young Black families are often at a structural disadvantage when it comes to providing their children with opportunities. Hence, even though Braithwaite and Bode were broke, they wanted to give their baby a different future. Braithwaite became very grateful for how her racially ambiguous name also protected her from discrimination. And there's a reason for that. It's well documented that name bias exists in university admissions choices and job application screenings. A 2009 study showed that job applicants with white-sounding names were 74% more likely to receive a positive response than those with a name associated with an ethnic minority. Hence, Braithwaite and her husband had to make a decision regarding their child's name in order to assimilate into a white world for opportunities without losing sight of their black identities. But soon after giving birth to her daughter, the writer nearly died because as a black woman, her concerns were not taken seriously. She had felt a lump below the scar of her cesarean, but the nurses dismissed it as scar tissue. But one night, she was rushed to hospital in a barely conscious state as her body slipped into septic shock. Luckily, she was operated on just in time, but if she had reached the hospital any later, she would have died. And statistics show that black British women are 5 times more likely to die in childbirth than white women. Their babies are more than twice as likely to be stillborn and 50% more likely to die within the first 28 days of their lives. This wasn't an isolated experience. Even wealthy celebrities like Serena Williams, who can afford the most luxurious medical treatment, have reported being handled negligently while giving birth. After nearly a month recovering in the hospital, she was finally strong enough to go home. But mentally healing from the experience would take much, much longer. Like many other mothers, Braithwaite had postnatal depression after the birth of her daughter. She had been through an extremely traumatic medical crisis and was still physically recovering. She also felt completely alienated from her tiny daughter Esme. After all, she had missed out on the first month of her life, a vital time for bonding between mother and child. She had even witnessed her own mother's depression, who had overdosed on a number of occasions. Hence she vowed never to become mentally ill, but it is out of our control. Thankfully, her mother came to the rescue. She recognized that her daughter needed help and encouraged her to go to a general practitioner. Braithwaite started antidepressants and soon felt better. She also opened up to Bode about her experiences, which helped her battle the shame she felt about being depressed. She realized that other black mothers around her were experiencing the same thing. They were expected to be tirelessly strong, the pillars holding everyone else up. But nobody stopped to question what kind of support they needed. Whilst London had always been her home, when she became pregnant with her son in 2017, she realized that it could no longer be her family's home. Austerity measures or government cutbacks meant that community centres and youth programmes were being shut down and school budgets were being cut. These changes disproportionately affected black families, who plunged further into poverty. One of the worst results has been the spike in violent knife crimes, as drug dealers tried to recruit vulnerable black men into their gangs. 2018 was the bloodiest year in London in over a decade, with 134 deaths by knife attacks. 2019 was even worse. Danger lurked on every street corner for young black men, who could get caught in the crossfire, even if they managed to evade gang recruitment. Police only made things worse with heavy-handed strip searches that made black men feel like criminals just for the colour of their skin. As a result, she moved away, but it brought with it other challenges. In fact, they were the only black family in the village of Milton Keynes outside of London. It wasn't long before the first racist incidents began. Esme came home one day asking to cut off her hair because other children had said it was rough. On another occasion, Braithwaite was incensed to learn that a 5-year-old girl in Esme's class had refused to play with her because her skin was too dark. Hence, they learnt that dangers could come in different forms, whether through gangs or microaggression. Due to lack of representation, Braithwaite also became galvanised into sharing diverse stories about motherhood. From working in publishing and marketing, she knew there was a burgeoning interest in bloggers, many of whom earned good money creating original content. Seeing that there wasn't any black representation featured on the top mummy blogger lists, she decided to become a blogger for herself. The author wanted to be as authentic as possible despite her community's taboo against sharing mental health, postnatal depression, or money issues. After all, she wanted other black British mothers to know that they weren't alone, that other women were having the same experiences. She wanted to break the silence that had kept her so isolated as a new mother. But she didn't only want to talk about the rough times. She also wanted to present a rare glimpse of a black nuclear family that was doing more than surviving, it was thriving. More fundamentally, she wanted to challenge the dominant glossy magazine version of motherhood. In 2017, Make Motherhood Diverse was born. The online platform quickly attracted a loyal following and allowed people to talk about their rich and diverse experiences of parenting in any kind of household, including blended families, same-sex couples, and households with parents who are disabled. Harmful stereotypes about Black British mothers nearly put her off from wanting to become a parent herself. But these same stereotypes have also galvanised her into finding her voice. So to sum up, in Don't Forget to Scream, Levy addresses the societal pressures placed on women to be perfect mothers and the often overlooked challenges of parenting, including sleep deprivation, loneliness, and anxiety. She also discusses the impact of motherhood on a woman's identity and the difficulty of balancing personal goals and aspirations with the demands of motherhood. Through her witty and relatable anecdotes, Levy aims to create a supportive community for mothers and to challenge the unrealistic expectations placed on them. In I Am Not Your Baby Mother, Braithwaite says Black British mothers will encounter racist stereotypes and prejudice everywhere they turn. When they become pregnant, they don't have the luxury to only think about how they will furnish their nurseries or what baby clothes they'll buy. They will also need to worry about how to protect their children from racism and offer them opportunities in a society where the odds will be stacked against them. By opening up about her struggles, Braithwaite has created a space where Black mothers can share their stories and support each other online. I am honestly afraid of motherhood as a disabled woman of colour. Apart from managing my own health whilst juggling being a parent, to the worrying microaggressions a child of the global majority may face, it isn't as straightforward as most people think. Please join in on the conversation by following @HowToBe247 on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and subscribe on the podcast, which can be found via www.howtobe247.com. Check out the new website and remember to subscribe to the email newsletter. Please do leave a review if you found this helpful and you want to be featured. Thanks to Regina Sloan, who is the CEO and host of the podcast Moms Who Achieve, for your lovely comments saying the podcast is right up her alley. Please remember to check out the Patreon. And we have a giveaway for this book, so please take part on Instagram. Before we go, here is fashion design lecturer Stacey Grant-Canham, who is the founder of Black & Beech. See you in 2 weeks' time.
Things that no one tells you about motherhood, that it can become a deeply politicizing experience based on first encounters, having to advocate for your health and your bodily autonomy, your choices, that when you have a baby, the world all of a sudden becomes a much more risky place to be, and you might want to change it for the better for your children. That all the things that you need, you have to find for yourself because no one's going to give them to you. You have to carve out time for your own well-being. And instead of asking, may I, can I, just say, I'm going to be doing this for me. You might find yourself incredibly lonely if you don't have other people to share the experience with. So try really hard to find at least one other person going through what you're going through.